Well, welcome everyone, and thank you again for taking the time out to join us for the application webinar for the Voluntary Pre-K Program 2019-20 application year. And we did a kickoff webinar last week just to kind of do some introductions to the application. We are going to repeat that information with deeper details today. So if you are unable to join that webinar, please know that you will get everything you need in this webinar. Plus, we have developed an FAQ with questions and answers that will also serve as a nice guide for you. It's a really packed webinar because I wanted to make sure that you get all the information that will help you successfully complete your application. So if it sounds like I'm just doing a lot of talking, I will be for this time. And if we don't have time for questions at the end, because I want to respect your time if we get too close, please know that Jessica Lord, our project manager and early childhood program manager, she is monitoring the chat box for questions, and that's what's going to inform our FAQ, and we will provide those details to you along with access to this recorded webinar and PowerPoint. A couple of other things I wanted to just make mention of is that we will have an additional webinar in January, on January 18th, that will be driven by follow-up questions you may have as you're going through the process, as well as some other things that we think would be helpful. So as you start to work on your application and you've kind of considered what we've been presenting in the webinars, and you say, I still have a question about this, that would be perfect to inform our next webinar. So please send those to Jessica Lord so that we can include those. All right, so we're going to get started, and I think that you'll, if you'll be ready, if you have notes and however you want to take notes, but some of you who have been through the process last year will be kind of like relieved maybe that it's very similar to last year. So the process will be very similar and with only few minor changes. So that should be a welcome, so that you're not having to learn a whole new thing and you know what to expect, and there's just going to be some nuanced changes to take note of. Let me just see if I can get my slides to advance. Oh, my slides don't want to go. So hold on just a second. Is it going on this one? Yeah. Okay, so, all right. So our objective today is that we are going to go over the updates and changes, like I mentioned. I also want to go over the timeline for submission and scoring of your application. We're going to talk about the application structure itself and the contents of each section, which include the utilization, program management, teaching and learning, continuous quality improvement, and the scoring rubric. So these are the same 4 sections we had in last year's application, and we're going to go over each one and highlight any changes that you need to be aware of for each one. And we're also going to highlight some scoring rubric pieces as well for the ones that have had some changes, and as well as to give you some examples of how you can use the rubric to guide your responses. And I also want to just encourage you to use the resources that you might already have at your fingertips. The quality definition document that the Office of Early Learning has put out will be very helpful in crafting your language around developmentally appropriate practices and kind of helping you formulate your continuous quality improvement goals. It certainly will give you some language for the teaching and learning pieces, so I hope you'll use that as a great resource. And you can use the, like I know last year, a lot of leaders have said, I know what's going on in there, I just don't have the words that I want to use to describe it. So I hope that you'll find that to be a great tool through the process. And I also encourage you to use your developmentally appropriate practice book, as we say, our fabulous green guidebook from Macy that we distributed last year. And you can use that to also inform your responses as you go. And if you've been attending the Early Learning 2.0 fall training, as well as some of our other trainings we've offered, those will be great resources to you as well. I also encourage you to take a look at the team guidance document that was recently released. in October for the pre-K. Now, not just the early educator one that was gone over in the team research training, but this one came out in October to support pre-K teacher evaluations more specifically, to give those look-for. So that would be another resource to use. So I hope that you'll take a look at those, and be sure that you're referencing the scope of services that was recently updated in May. All right. So let's get moving through this. So let's talk about some of the application updates. But before I do that, I always want to give just some context for those who, again, who are new, serving in a new role as the VPK director. So we're in this process of a competitive grant that's based on quality on the basis of the Pre-K Quality Act of 2016. So this Pre-K Quality Act asked us to create a competitive grant-based process based on quality, as well as to implement pre-K and kindergarten student growth portfolios. And also, we had to have strong alignment between pre-K and K-12 instruction, which is what led us to the revision of the 10 Ls for that strong vertical alignment. And then you see listed lastly there, the Office of Early Learning was charged to develop a definition of quality with which programs will comply. And what's interesting to note about our definition of quality is that you'll see all throughout that document that those are the very sections of your voluntary pre-K application. We have sections in each one of these areas, and so this will be a nice tight alignment for you. And if you want an electronic copy of our Quality Matters document, you can find it on our website, and you can download it there. If you were at our Early Childhood Summit this past summer, you received a personal copy of that. And you might also want to go to our website and look up some of those sessions that were presented, because we had some great presenters that had some information that you could use to articulate some of the pieces in your application as well. So looking at our quality definition, there's the sections that you will find that you will be answering in your application, but in our quality document, we have sections on program management that relate to access and attendance, your community partnerships and services and structure, as well as a section on teaching and learning. And in this section, you're specifically looking at things that relate to the classroom environment, the daily schedule and use of time, standards, curriculum and assessment, interactions and instruction, and then there's a continuous quality improvement section that we really focus on building your leadership capacity as well as the capacity of your teachers to improve their practices and how to use data-driven instruction. And as we move through the application, you will see each of these sections highlighted again. And I hope that you'll really value the strong alignment that you will see. And just to give you a little bit more context for each of these that you see here on the teaching and learning side, the environment is going to not just speak to the actual physical design of the environment, but it also speaks to the interactive experiences and experiential learning that occurs during learning centers with accessible materials supporting diversity and inclusion. Now, this is where, as an instructor, I would say highlight and mark that with a star so that when you're formulating an answer about your environment, I would make sure that I'm really highlighting the things your program's really doing well in really having interactive experiences for children that really are hands-on and experiential. So if you have like experiences that are only paper-based, versus providing concrete experiences first, that's something to think about. How can we move more towards experiential learning, high-quality instructional experiences for children, and making accessible, open-ended materials that support not only diversity and inclusion, but higher-order thinking for children? And in the schedule, we're thinking more in terms of how is time being allotted for learning centers in a way that supports children learning through play, advancing through different stages of play so that they get to these higher order thinking and learning levels instead of having short bursts of rotations through centers in which they never get there with the learning. Standards, curriculum, and assessment really should function as a cycle of teaching and learning that informs instruction and impacts children's learning. And think about how your teachers are doing this well with carefully designed and sequenced interdisciplinary conceptual units of study or themes that are differentiated based on teachers' observation of the children, as well as children's individual and developmental needs. So thinking about how are you encouraging teachers to intentionally observe children, where they are in their development and where they are in their instructional needs. How do you do that? And how is your program doing that well? What goals have you set? What changes and impact are you seeing? And in the interactions and instructions, thinking more about how these are used most effective within the structure of the learning center so that teachers are modeling and facilitating exploration and embedded practice. So really starting to see the teachers move from being the center of the stage in front of the classroom delivering instruction to really being interactive and right there with the children in the learning centers and observing, scaffolding learning, and setting the stage for what comes next for them. So let's talk about a few application changes and updates that we want you to be aware of. So the department requested feedback regarding last year's application process, and based on this feedback, the department has made a few revisions to the process. So with this application, we have increased the application completion window. We heard you loud and clear that we needed more time and there's lots of things on your plate that you must juggle. So this allows you more flexibility in juggling those things and making time to complete certain pieces and to work with different people of your team to complete different sections. And so we hope that you will really value this increased completion window time. We've also moved up the date for feedback on scored applications. We heard you also loud and clear that this would help you make decisions for next year in a more timely manner. So we heard that and wanted to accommodate that. We provided clear questions and some just guidance around how to respond, and the rubric provides some clear guidance on how you can achieve levels 4, 3, 2, or 1. We provided data from EIS and other systems that will help simplify the process, and we demonstrated clear connections between questions and the rubric scoring. So in regard to the application structure, the application window and feedback will be moved to a December-April timeframe. The application will be completed in ePlan, so all electronically, and only those attachments requested in the application will be scored. So only upload where you see it's been requested, and in some areas you'll see where you're supposed to copy and paste something. So pay attention to the requests for those, and those are the only ones you need to do. Budget, site locations, and teacher licensure sections will be completed once grants are extended. Once grant awards are extended, excuse me. These will not be considered in the scoring process. I just want to emphasize once again that analysts who score the applications will not be scoring any attachments other than those directly requested within the application. And know that there is no limit on characters. I know some people struggled with trying to fit their responses in there, so we just removed that so that it would be easier for you. That doesn't mean that it has to be an exhaustive answer, but we just wanted to accommodate those who tend to be like me, like to use more words to describe your response. And districts are strongly encouraged to structure responses by using the rubric. We cannot emphasize that enough. If you leave today and you hear one good takeaway, it will be reference the scoring rubric. Know what the rubric says for each question and what it's asking for, because that's what the analysts will use to score very objectively. We have a really comprehensive application hiring process for those analysts. We make sure that they are grounded in early childhood, they are experts, and we really work on training them objectively to score to that rubric. So please use that in guiding your responses. In regard to the application timeline, we wanted to make sure that you will have an electronic copy of the application. So they'll be emailed to the VPK directors during the week of December 3rd, 2018, which is this current week. The application will be posted on the VPK website during the same week. Changes to the application are currently being made in ePlan, so that that'll be all ready for you. We will notify VPK directors when the platform is available. All applications will be due February 8th, 2019, and notification of award will be made by April 15th, 2019. Application sections and weights. This is also important to take note of, that we talked about. There are 4 sections to the application. They're listed here, and each section is weighted with this percentage. So there are questions under each section. So the utilization section has its own set of questions, and a total of those scores will represent 25% of your application score. Likewise, program management will make up 20%, teaching and learning will make up 35%, and the continuous improvement will make up 20%. We will now spend some time going through each section individually, beginning with utilization. The first section is utilization. This year, the utilization rates are embedded into the application. Let me say that again. This year, the utilization rates are embedded into the application. They will be populated from EIS and uploaded into ePlan. And they're going to be, let me move here so this will be better for you to see. So section 1 will be uploaded into ePlan. The data will be pulled from EIS. And I want to just emphasize the difference between utilization and capacity. Utilization and capacity rates will both be considered, but you need to know the difference between the two. Utilization reflects the number of low-income 4-year-old students enrolled in VPK seats. Capacity, this reflects the number of students enrolled in the program regardless of age or income eligibility. So under the continuous quality improvement section of the application, you can also include a goal around how you're planning to increase utilization rates that explains your current utilization rate, your past utilization trends, and the efforts you're taking to increase utilization. So I just wanted to make those clear to you and provide an example too. So let's suppose District A has been awarded 5 classrooms. Since classroom supply seats for 20 students, 5 classes will provide 100 seats. If 95 of those seats are full, the district is sitting at 95% capacity. However, if only 70 of those 95 students are low-income 4-year-olds, the district utilization rate is 70%. Any student served who is not an income eligible 4-year-old student will not be considered in your utilization numbers. And the VPK scope of services indicates you will be at 95% capacity for the majority of the year. While we encourage you to do everything you can to fill seats with low-income 4-year-olds, seats should be filled with the next. Oh, thank you for muting. And so, since this fall season has begun, we've worked really closely with districts. Liz Newsom has done an amazing job reaching out and supporting districts and helping get their data correct and accurate in EIS in preparation for the December 1st data pull. So all information will be uploaded into ePlan on that date, and if you know, EIS takes a minute or so to update and become available, but that's the information that will be drawn from to determine utilization rates. So again, to emphasize that data will be pulled from EIS, 3 years of data will be included, all numbers must be correct in EIS as we've been messaging by November 30th, in time for the final pull to be made on December 1st. Utilization rates are determined again by the number of low-income 4-year-old students served. And if you need help just to kind of more explaining what the utilization rates are, we're happy to provide some assistance. And the FAQ will certainly go a little bit deeper in answering the questions that you're offering up during this webinar. So let's take a look at Section 2, the program management. What you can see here are components that relate to access and attendance, community partnerships and services, and structural quality. Access and attendance, this component focuses on the intended audience of the grant, those low-income 4-year-olds. And we have asked districts to create policies regarding pre-K attendance. These policies should help increase average daily attendance rates. In the community partnerships and services section, the districts are asked to focus on services, screenings, and supports for students and families. This component also encourages community partnerships that support the pre-K practices. And under structural quality, districts are kind of responding to the ways that they are showing their compliance and adoption of the state law, early childhood policy, and following the rules and regulations that provide specific details for health and safety standard compliance. So more deeply, if you want to see what kinds of questions you should be thinking about around access and attendance, there will be 5 questions on the following topics: identification of need, recruitment, eligibility determination and application prioritization, enrollment and eligibility challenges, and attendance. Just like last year's enrollment section, there are 5 questions that you see here. But here's a change that you need to be aware of that has been made to this section. Let's look at these changes. So all districts must respond to section 2A, which is identification of need, 2B, statement of service consideration, and 2F, attendance. I'm going to let you marinate on that first section for a second. All districts must respond to these sections that you see here, 2A, 2B, and 2F. Now here's a change. Change to the 2019-20 access and attendance section. Districts who meet or exceed 90% utilization are exempt from providing written responses to sections C, 2C, 2D, and 2E. Additionally, these districts must attach a copy of their student application. So let me read that again. Districts who meet or exceed 90% utilization are exempt from providing written responses to sections 2C, 2D, and 2E. And additionally, you will attach a copy of their student application. But remember, even those districts who do that will still respond like all districts to 2A, B, and F. Districts who do not meet or exceed 90% utilization must also respond in full to sections 2C, that's recruitment, 2D, the eligibility determination and application prioritization, and 2E, enrollment and eligibility challenges. Utilization rates below 90%. If your utilization rate is below 90%, provide a narrative response to all 5 questions in the access and attendance section. Let's take a look at a few of these questions related to identification of need, recruitment, eligibility determination, and applicant prioritization, enrollment and eligibility challenges, and attendance. So let's start with identification of need as an example. So you're asked to provide information regarding your district's need for quality pre-K programs, and you're asked to consider the following things: demographic and/or geographic shifts, poverty trends, information regarding the unmet need for quality child care programs that are public or private, whether your sites are situated in locations that serve the most eligible children, any other factors that may impact enrollment. So again, this is just kind of an example of how we have combined multiple tasks into one identification of need question so that you can summarize those and speak to those. Because I know a number of you have talked about some changing needs of your area. So this gives you an opportunity to provide information around that. But remember, for each question, the applicants, you should read the question that's being asked, and what are you going to do? You're going to turn to that scoring rubric so that specifically corresponds to the question asked, so that you can see what kind of information is being asked for and how it will be scored. So I would encourage you to have your application always out with you, as well as that rubric as a guide. Let's talk about recruitment. So you'll be asked to describe your district's pre-K registration processes, and you'll be asked to include responses to the following questions that you see listed here. So you're going to talk about how is registration publicized to the community, how does your district recruit and enroll eligible students, and how do you know your current processes are effective? Again, we're looking at that rubric so that you can highlight the best practices that you see laid out in the criteria. And here you'll find an example of when you are requested to upload documents. So here's a question that you are asked where the district will be asked to describe your process for determining which children will attend VPK. Please include the responses to the following questions. You'll talk about how does your district prioritize applicants to ensure that 90% of children who enroll are income eligible. You will talk about how student eligibility is determined and what documentation is collected. And something to think about here is thinking about need versus want. How do you know that there's a need in your community, and how do you determine that, and how do you document that? How are students selected for participation? How and when are families notified of their status? What is your district's process for maintaining a waiting list and tracking enrollment? We've had lots of families reach out specifically to say there was a little bit of confusion around this waiting list. They were not among the low-income 4-year-olds targeted, like what does the wait list look like and what does that really mean, and how long does that happen? So you might want to speak to how you manage all of that. And you are asked here for an attachment. So here's the example of uploading a document. Please attach a copy of your student application. Just when we move towards the community partnerships and services section, this has 2 questions that's related to family resources and your community pre-K advisory council. So just like last year, the application provides some guiding questions with the intent to look closely at how your district helps children with a pre-K to kindergarten transition. This is also a space to talk about how your community pre-K advisory council helps fill the additional seats according to the guidelines that it proposes. And to maximize, again, your scoring opportunities, make sure you're referencing that rubric for each section in each question that it's asking. Moving on to structural quality, this component is comprised of 2 questions related to teacher qualifications and safety and health. While both of these are monitored by school-based support services and the law is clear about expectations, districts are asked to elaborate on their monitoring and support of these components. In regard to safety and health, you'll be asked to describe how your district monitors programs for the following: the Early Childhood Environment Rating Scales, the ECRs, the Early Language and Literacy Classroom Observation, ELCO, compliance with rules and regulations, and compliance with scope of services. And you're asked to include the ways in which feedback, this is the important piece. It's not just that these tools are used, but what are the ways in which feedback is provided and data is used to make instructional and programmatic decisions. And what's the procedure for following up when a plan is created and when corrective action is needed? How are those processes handled? And mostly, how is the feedback data utilized? So here's an example of this, how to use a scoring rubric. I'm going to spend a little bit of time here just kind of walking through the scoring rubric so that you can see and become acclimated to it. First of all, you'll always see on the top of the rubric the section title. So here you see 2D, enrollment and eligibility challenges. And then you'll see the actual question above the rubric so that you will always know what question you're on. That's why I think having that side by side will be so instrumental. So taking a look at this one, it says, please explain any challenges you have had in meeting eligibility requirements and how you have worked to overcome those challenges. Please note, 90% of children served should be income eligible 4-year-olds. So then you'll notice that there's a 4, 3, 2, 1, 0 rating. And it's always helpful when you look at rubrics to go to the extremes first. So if you were looking and saying like, oh my goodness, what would happen if I scored a 0? What does that mean? So that means that you had a response that did not address at all the challenges of meeting eligibility requirements, or the response does not indicate a plan for overcoming the eligibility requirement challenges. So notice that there's 2 parts to that. You have to address what challenges exist, right, and what's your plan. So if neither one of those are present, that's a 0. Or response gives no indication for how the district plans to maintain or continue to place eligible children in seats. You'll have a score of 0. Those are the components that result in that. But moving all the way over to the 4, which means that's just really exceptional, then this means that the response provides a detailed description about how the district addresses challenges of eligibility requirements or plans to maintain eligibility requirements, and including, and I think I might have some clicks here, a clear understanding and description of multiple issues and roadblocks that interfere with enrollment, a detailed plan for overcoming those challenges, a few ways additional seats could be used to meet the need if available and or wanted, and a response describes multiple ways the district plans to maintain or continue to place eligible children in seats. And I just want to point out something about rubrics in general. So you say, okay, what makes a difference between 3 and 4? So you need to pay attention to the wording that changes across the 4, 3, 2, 1. So in 4, if you look at the criteria, you see a word that keeps reoccurring. Take a look. And if you want, there's a zoom button at the bottom of your slide that you can make this bigger because I know it can be difficult to see sometimes. What stands out to me is the word multiple. So in number 4 rating, you're going to have multiple issues and roadblocks that you're talking about, you're describing. A detailed is another word, detailed plan, right? And then you're going to have multiple ways how the district plans to maintain or continue to place eligible children in seats. Whereas in number 3 rating, you see that there is not the detailed plan, but a plan does exist, which is a good thing. And then you see that it's maybe not as detailed as the difference. So thinking about that, they're not multiple, they're not detailed. Jumping over to 2 rating, what is the wording you see in the criteria? Because a lot of it may have some of the elements, but not all. There may be some, not multiple. It's definitely not detailed of a response. And there are some general ideas on how they're going to have this maintenance or continuation plan. So you can see that it moves from a non-existent kind of thing with a 0 to like a 1 that has just a few and some vagueness, to 2, there's some, right? To 3, there's a better outline of a plan, there's a clear plan, but 4 is with multiple kind of things that are described, as well as an extremely detailed plan. But I want to point out another thing for this year especially, that we know that level 4, first of all, is exemplary. So I want you to know that. So I know we're all overachievers. We all want a 4, right? But I want you to know that that could be a growth area as well. And then I want you also to know that an automatic score of 4 will be given for those who meet or exceed 90% utilization. So I want to repeat that. So an automatic score of 4 on this question will be given for those who meet or exceed 90% utilization. This is a change to this year's scoring rubric for those who meet or exceed the 90% utilization rate. Let me see if I have anything else I want to say about that. So let's move on to the Section 3 Teaching and Learning section. The third section of the application covers the teaching and learning indicators. Again, you will notice strong alignment to our quality definition document and our Early Learning 2.0 trainings, this past summer's Early Childhood Summit 2018 presentations, as well as the new release team observation guidance document for pre-K. And again, using your other resources you've seen given in those trainings, you'll see that very tight alignment. So again, as we started this webinar, you saw these featured in alignment with our quality definition, and you see these are the very same sections of this application. So this section it's weighted at 35%, and again, it's broken up into classroom organization, integrated systems, interactions, and instructions. And in the beginning of the webinar, I kind of walked you through that the classroom organization is talking more than just about the layout of the classroom, but really wants you to describe specifically how that environment is facilitating learning and how teachers and students spend their time during the day together in those learning centers, together really having those concrete experiences, and how teachers are observing to know what comes next for those children and how to differentiate and how to scaffold learning, so that they're modeling language and they're modeling think alouds and all those wonderful things. And that time is spent really giving them the time to play out their learning. Integrated systems section will really ask about how are you implementing your curriculum, your 10Ls alignment, and services for special populations. And within interactions and instruction, the application will ask about some ways in which VPK programs are intentionally responsive to student needs. This is a great place to discuss class district trends if you have that information. In January, you will receive a class report on your district trends. So it would be great to include like your thoughts about how are you thinking ahead. This might be something you would also add to your continuous quality improvement section when you're asked to formulate some SMART goals for your program. And again, the classroom organization piece, you'll have 3 questions, and you'll have the opportunity to answer questions around child-centered environment, developmentally appropriate schedules, and effective use of time. And I want to emphasize that when we talk about the developmentally appropriate schedule, we're not really looking for a rigid schedule with set, like, here's what we do for 10 minutes, and then we jump over here and we have 10 minutes, and then we have this going on and this going on and this going on. That's not really the most effective use of time. I know that many of you have worked so hard to reduce the time spent in transitions. And like I said in our last webinar, we recognize that you cannot change the architectural design of your building. The PE gymnasium is always going to be located where it is. It may be the farthest from the pre-K classroom. The playground might create a transition, the cafeteria. We are not expecting those changes, but what we can see is how within the day we are reducing these unnecessary stop-and-go transitions between activities that really do not allow children to reach optimal learning levels and higher order thinking. So thinking about use of time a little bit differently and more deeply this year, I want to see examples of those. And also thinking just about how the teacher spends her time within that schedule with the students engaged in the actual learning, especially during learning centers. So thinking about what that looks like and what that kind of is growing and developing in your own program. More specifically about child-centered environment, this is something to note as a slight change from last year's application. We are asking really for specific information related to your new curriculum selection. So we're asking you to explain what is considered in the development of a classroom environment and how students interact with the environment to facilitate learning, specifically around what kind of curriculum resources are in the environment that facilitate learning, how are curriculum resources chosen and changed throughout the year, and how do students access those curriculum resources within the classroom. So if you happen to be using Connect for Learning, we're looking for specifics towards that curriculum. If your district uses Big Day for pre-K, yours will be specific to that curriculum resource and creative curriculum. So looking specifically to how your district is responding to those. In regard to developmentally appropriate schedule, I kind of already jumped ahead and talked about that. So here's some bullets for that. So just really, again, thinking differently about your schedule, but I do want to say this point loud and clear. We do not want to see literacy block instruction happening in pre-K. And for some specific guidance instead, go to the team guidance observation document that will give you look-fors and suggestions for what you should see in instruction happening across the day, the pre-K day, and really speak to what you're doing with those transitions to reduce those stop-and-go activities in the classroom and how your efforts are increasing the time children spend in learning centers. And the response should really focus on how children are spending their time and thinking about how teachers participate in that. So again, we already kind of spoke to the effective use of time. I already jumped kind of to this. You can tell where my passion lies about this literacy block time versus literacy and language happens all across the day, as well as math should be embedded across the day as well. And I really hope to see strong responses to this about how learning centers are being used to build both knowledge and skills in an integrated way. I just thought of another resource you might want to take a look at. We did a strong LEAD presentation at the LEAD conference this year about learning centers that really do build both knowledge and skills in an integrated way. So that's another great thing to look for. And I think that their PowerPoints are still on their website as well, and I'm happy to provide those if you would like that as well. So the integrated systems, this component is comprised of 4 questions that deals with standards alignment, curriculum, child assessment and observation, and special populations. There are slight changes from last year to be aware of related to the standards alignment and curriculum questions asked. Let's take a look at these modifications. So this section includes 2 questions asking you to describe the state-approved curriculum you are using to ensure classroom instruction is aligned to the developmental domains in the 10 Ls. So again, the focus is on how the state-approved curriculum you are using to ensure classroom instruction is aligned. How your district ensures that teachers and teacher assistants have the support necessary for effective curriculum. So for the curriculum section, you're going to describe specifically how your district ensures that teachers and teacher assistants have ongoing quality and professional development supports necessary for effective curriculum implementation. And please note the addition of teacher assistants in the question regarding curriculum. We know that they play a valuable role, and I am so excited. I've heard so many districts saying, hey, guess what? We included those teacher assistants in that teacher training for the curriculum, and that's powerful stuff. That's great. That's a great way to build some highly effective classrooms. So by training those assistants to use the instructional tools, we empower them to engage in content conversations with students. Okay, and then in regard to child assessment and observation, this question asks you to list and describe how pre-K data is collected, reviewed, and used to inform practice. Consider the following, and I would add first, why is the data collected? Then how is it data? How is the data being collected? Who uses the data? How often is data reviewed? And how is data, more importantly, used to guide instruction? If we're doing a lot of testing and assessing and the data just sits and doesn't do what we intended to do, and it really doesn't drive our instructional decisions, and it really doesn't take into account where children are developmentally and helps me plan for what comes next tomorrow or next week for the children, how purposeful is it? How useful of their time and energy it takes to use those assessments is it? So thinking deeply about this, the purpose of the data, and how you're using that data. Again, this is an opportunity for you to weigh in on class district trends. Again, you'll be getting that report in January. Special populations, students who require special education services and English learners should be offered the same access to VPK as all other students. The grant is intended, again, you'll hear this over and over again, to serve income-eligible 4-year-olds regardless of their learning needs. So the first and foremost thing we're looking for is that eligibility of those 4-year-olds. Students from these subgroups should be offered the opportunity to apply for VPK, and special circumstances alone do not guarantee access to the program. I also want to reassure you that Jessica Lord is taking great notes on all the questions coming in. I'm moving through the information so that you have this to come back to, and it will be made available to you, the PowerPoint as well as the recording. So one other point about special populations, you will be asked to provide specific information, plans, or strategies that you have used and or plan to use to effectively serve children with exceptional learning needs. And this includes children who require special education services and English learners. Having said that, this question asks you to elaborate on inclusion practices and supports in place for unique learners. And the Fall Early Learning 2.0 session really asks you to bring in your special education teachers so that they can have just participation in the process as well as inform our instructional practices as well. Interactions and instruction. With this component, there are 2 questions that are related to the following topics: responsive nurturing student-teacher interaction and academically rigorous, developmentally appropriate practices. This component is requesting responses to these questions, and the first centers on interactions, and the second is really about how instruction itself is delivered. And again, you have some great resources and tools to help you with language around those. But just to give you a little bit more context, the responsive nurturing student-teacher interaction piece asks you to describe your district's policies and practices to encourage healthy social and personal competencies for your pre-K students. This includes training for teachers and educational assistants on how to create responsive and nurturing learning environments for young children. Includes specifics on any particular training received, and if teachers received that training a long time ago, give some specifics on how do you maintain that learning, how do you update it, how do you make sure that everyone stays current and feels supported. Give examples of best practices of that your program has in regard to promoting positive school culture and strengthening positive connections among students and between students and adults. And include descriptions of your district's practices regarding students with persistent or extreme behavior issues. And notice here, this is an occurrence of where you are asked to copy and paste into the application. You're going to include your pre-K discipline policy in the space that will be provided below the question. So you see the last line, again, I want to point this out. Ask you to copy and paste. It's not an attachment. So I want to say that again. It's a copy and paste, not an attachment. You are copy and pasting your discipline policy, and this should include your pre-K expulsion and suspension plan. In regard to academically rigorous, developmentally appropriate practice, or DAP, the following resources have been made available to help you craft your response and to, articulate what your district's doing well related to this area. You can certainly use our definition of quality matters that we've mentioned throughout. You can use the 2017 VPK convening slides that we had a director's convening. The ELM Phase 2 training, we can kind of talk you through some of those if you're looking for those. 2018 Early Childhood Summit presentations, and again, your NACCE Developmentally Appropriate Practices book. And again, you have lots of tools probably that you already use in your district that will also help you, I'm quite confident. And using the scoring rubric here again, this is an example, again, we looked at it with eligibility, but here's the teaching and learning, it's weighted at 35%. And you see again how the question appears above. The question guides what the analyst will be looking for. However, to get the full picture and determine how best to construct your response, you really have to refer to this rubric. So I would encourage you to look at the rubric, but I'm going to kind of demonstrate for you. So you're being asked in this question to explain the thought processes behind constructing pre-K environments and how that facilitates learning. So for my example, you could imagine with me, I'm going to pretend I'm talking about a district who has 55 VPK classrooms. So this means I have to think about walkthrough forms that we use, the training and feedback that is provided to teachers. In general, I have to give the overall expectation. But hold up, before I even start my response, I'm going to go where? I'm going to go to the scoring rubric. I noticed that the rubric asks me to give a detailed response about how environments are developed. My concern is that we have only redelivered some of the ELM sessions on environments. So I'm not really sure what the teachers are doing to rotate and choose materials in those learning centers. So I will need to include this information in the teacher roundtable discussion we are having. Say that's what you're having, to talk about your teachers. I hope you bring teachers into your conversations to describe what's happening in your program. And then you also see that the rubric asks for multiple examples. So you need examples for academic and developmental needs, how that you're really addressing both of those. When I look down at the rating for a 3, I see that it asks to list 2 examples. Since rating 3 asks for at least 2 examples, I know I want to try to provide more. So when considering academic and developmental needs, my thinking is that we are looking for examples of materials, open-ended, that will intentionally cover the developmental domain while also providing differentiation for instruction. And I am reflecting on the example from the Early Learning 2.0 training. I'm thinking about the descriptors in the quality definition document and some of the other presentations we have given. So you can include those in your descriptions and thinking about how you're doing this well. You probably can remember how it's important to discuss the environment and how changes need to happen throughout the year. And you might also be thinking about how writing centers and the materials that are included throughout that encourage writing to happen in an embedded way, but also that writing materials include materials that develop motor skills. It's not always just paper and pencil. You might have lacing cards and clay and stamps that allow children to make letters when they're not able to form letters with the pencil and paper. So when you're thinking about how children interact with the environment, you might also be thinking about experiential learning. And you might think about how are we providing concrete experiences for children? How are children exploring the environment? What opportunities do they have? And the environment can include the indoor and outdoor environment as well. So thinking about all those things, you might also think about the 12 principles of development and learning that's found in the NACCE book to think about what kinds of things we need to keep in mind. So you can see that the rubric really will help you craft a detailed response, and it'll say, oh, yes, we do that, and here's how I can describe that. So I hope that you'll find that the rubric will not be intimidating, but that it will be a useful resource. I want to pause for a second and recognize and honor your time. It is now 9 o'clock, and I know you gave 1 hour to this webinar, so if you have to leave, please don't panic. You may go on to another meeting that you may have, but I'm going to continue and finish the webinar so that you will have the completed recording of this. But again, if you need to go on to another meeting, please feel free to do that. But I'm going to move on to the section that deals with continuous quality improvement. I'm just going to move through those clicks. So this section is weighted at 20%, and you'll notice that this is a section that you will take a look at how your district creates a culture of continuous improvement, speaking specifically to the ways that you are intentionally building effective early childhood leadership, the way that you are using data-driven improvement, as well as your plans and your commitment to providing ongoing professional learning that includes stakeholder training, job-embedded professional learning, and improvement science. And remember, we introduced you to this idea of improvement science through the Plan, Do, Study, Act model. So I'll say that again, the Plan, Do, Study, Act model, and we kind of abbreviated that to be the PDSA. And we helped last year directors form SMART goals around that as a way to study things in the process to see, like, here's our plan, let's study how it's going, let's decide whether we're going to adapt it or we're going to keep going. And so it's an ongoing looking at our data for that process. And again, I want to point out that there's no single method for decreasing, the variable of quality among voluntary pre-K programs statewide. Just as every child has unique gifts, talents, and needs, our programs do as well. So we recognize that you have just unique plans that work best for your district, and we certainly want to support those. But we want to hear you articulate these points in your application. So when you're thinking about the data that you're using to improve student outcomes, think about the data that you are choosing to use. Think about its defined purpose, the why. Why are you using it? What will it tell you? How is it used to set goals? How does it determine next steps in instruction? And more importantly, how is it used to improve student outcomes? Programs are encouraged to minimize multiple assessments that have the potential to disrupt teaching and learning, and should instead focus on specific program priority assessments. So keeping these in mind, you will also have the class data report for your district trends in January, so you might want to incorporate some of those, like we mentioned earlier, that as you're thinking about creating some SMART goals for your program, you can consider those trends. It would certainly be great to think about pro-planning, like proactive planning for your professional learning opportunities. So included in this section, you'll be able to describe things that you're doing to create that culture of improvement and your professional learning and your data-driven improvements again. So I want to make sure we get to this section of the culture of improvement updates, because this component is comprised of 2 questions related to teacher evaluation and portfolio implementation. Oops, let me go back. So these questions are asking about these two areas, and this is a great place, I want to say, for you to go back and discuss that use of the team observation guidance document for supporting pre-K teacher evaluations. The portfolio question has been slightly modified. So I want to say that again. The portfolio question has been slightly modified from last year's application. This question asks districts how training has been redelivered to teachers in your district and how you will specifically continue to support teachers through various transitions within the portfolio process, and to describe your district's comprehensive plan for ongoing training and support of pre-K and kindergarten teachers and best practices to support successful portfolio implementation. So what are your identified district needs going forward in this area would be something to highlight as well. So then you come to the professional learning question, and here's an opportunity for you to discuss your plans and what you've been doing well and what you're thinking about going forward. How will your leadership team redeliver Early Learning 2.0 training? How do you ensure all of your teachers have received training that's inclusive but not limited to the selected state-approved pre-K curriculum? And how will professional learning opportunities be anchored in district needs that are identified from the class assessments that were conducted? How is ongoing professional learning embedded into the daily practice of your district leaders, school leaders, teachers, and teacher assistants? So really moving towards that model of job-embedded professional learning. And what recent or ongoing trainings were delivered that encourage quality improvements? You see that this one has lots of things that you can highlight. And in what way are school leaders involved in early childhood trainings? And I hope that you really spend time highlighting that, because I've certainly seen a lot of you in the training sessions, and I think that you should give a shout out to yourselves for being active in those. And then in what ways do your professional learning strategies improve and or increase collaboration with other teachers and grades? And lastly, what other needs does your district have in ensuring quality professional learning for teacher and assistants? And I want to make you just aware of a professional learning update to the application. Here you're going to describe how you ensure all teachers receive training that, again, was inclusive of the selected state-approved pre-K curriculum, as well as you are asked to describe the ways professional learning opportunities are anchored in district needs that were identified from class assessments conducted. So these will be the district trends. In the data-driven improvement section, you are asked to respond to 2 questions around developing goals and identifying SMART goals. And we've talked about some ideas throughout this webinar for some things that you could include here. And just for those of you who want specific help around how to craft SMART goals, here's some examples that you'll see on the slide, and I'll just have those for you to read through. But again, SMART goals are specific, they're measurable, attainable, they're relevant, and time-based. And again, many of you chose to use that plan, do, study, act cycle to help you create ones that were specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. So again, I think that we've said it quite a bit through the webinar, but we certainly want to keep encouraging you to reference the scoring rubric for every section of the application so that you can really understand how the ratings work and how they change from a 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. So pay attention to the particulars that exist there. And as you see, I'm going to do some clicking, but you can see some nuances between the 4, 3, 2, 1 as I click. But I want to highlight some next steps for you. Begin working with your district teams. You can start crafting some of your answers. Some folks have found it really helpful to save those in Word documents, and then they can copy and paste them into the actual application. Begin responding with your Word documents that will be provided. And again, before February 8th, 2019, you will upload your completed application into ePlan. And I also wanted you to know that ePlan will be updating, and you'll see your utilization scores be entered as soon as they appear. So we know that it takes a minute for it to appear.